D.C. Democrats sue to block ranked choice voting ballot measure in Washington, D.C. This is from the Washington Post. We'll read a little bit of this. Just weeks after the D.C. Board of Elections determined that a proposed ballot initiative to bring ranked choice voting and open primaries to the city's elections was legally sufficient to move forward, the D.C. Democratic Party has filed a lawsuit that would keep it off the ballot, arguing that the measure violates the U.S. Constitution. What? And home rule charter. The lawsuit.
Okay, I am assuming, we're not lawyers here. I'm assuming the angle there is because of the special status that DC has. I don't see how else you could make that kind of an argument.
I don't think that argument has been made anywhere else. But we'll read on.
I'm assuming that's based in its special status, but I could be wrong.
So filed August 1st in D.C. Superior Court and first reported by DSist says the city's elections board erred last month when it determined that the proposed initiative was proper subject matter and asked the court to permanently block it from being implemented. While the measure's organizers still have a long way to go before the Make All Votes Count Act, also known as Initiative 83, reaches next year's ballot, it has already drawn a chorus of opposition, including from the city's Republican Party. As proposed, Initiative 83, started in 2026, would allow more than 80,000 people registered as unaffiliated to vote in D.C.'s primary election, which is currently closed to them. Pardon me. It would also implement a ranked choice balloting system in the city. Supporters of the measure, who argued Tuesday that the Democratic Party's lawsuit was filed prematurely and should be dismissed, say these two charges would make elections more accessible in the district. Opening primaries would give unaffiliated residents in Deep Blue D.C. a voice in the city's crucial primary elections. As for ranked choice voting, proponents say it would ensure elected candidates receive at least 50% of the vote, which isn't always the case now, it's not always the case now nationwide, but the thing that makes this particularly egregious, in my view, is that this is happening in Washington, D.C., which is dominated by the Democratic Party. So this strikes me as simply a flex of power and a way to sort of drown these kinds of initiatives in the bathtub because they're afraid that they may catch on and spread elsewhere. In order for ranked choice voting to even come into play where it has the potential to affect a race, there has to be no candidate achieving majority support on the first round. DC goes literally, 80, 90% Democrat. So in what universe would you even get to a second round here, right? In what universe would the amount of independents, which is very, very small, like I said, DC is one of the bluest cities in the country. In fact, I think at the presidential level, it's the bluest city in the country. You're talking about mid-90s support for Democrats. So what the hell could they possibly be worried about? Republicans also made an argument. It goes on. I don't have to read that whole thing. But Democrats basically said, well, if there's more than two choices, it'll be confusing to voters, which is obviously an insult to voters. And the Republicans reverted to their classic, well, voter fraud. It makes the process corrupt and things like that. So both parties just sort of reverted to their sort of pitch issues here in order to try and stop this. But the fact that they are trying to stop this in Washington, D.C. shows either that this is just a flex or that they are nervous about the influence of third parties down the road. It could be either one. It could be a little bit of both in this case, since this measure wouldn't even affect 2024. It would start in 2026. So when you talk about Cornel West, that's not even a factor here. This wouldn't even start this cycle.
Yeah, finding out the Democrats are against democracy, it's like when you get to the fifth level in Scientology and find out they're really not into science.
Yeah.
It's right there in the name. You would think they'd be for democracy, but apparently not. It's funny when you look at their arguments. It's clearly a kitchen sink argument. They're just making every argument they can make, figuring at least one of them will stick and they'll be able to kill this. And the article that we're basing this on, the Washington Post article, it didn't focus on the Republicans, but it did mention, just to be clear, they're not any more in favor of allowing a democratic process than the Democrats are. It's just that the Democrats, in their wisdom, decided not to pretend to believe in the rights of voters. But if you look at the arguments they're throwing out, some of these arguments are like, well, if all the constitutional arguments fail, at the very least, do you think that our DC government would be competent to administrate something like this?
Right.
We can barely run elections now.
Right.
You think we could have? Wow, that really makes the case that you should be in charge. Who's been in charge of DC all these years? If you're so good at running DC, why is it so dysfunctional that you're arguing that you can't have ranked choice voting here? And besides that, I've touched on this here and there, that I'm sympathetic to some of the arguments that you see black conservatives make about the liberal take on black communities. And, it is to their credit, given that it's the Washington Post, that they gave ink to the people who said, because they're arguing, well, it would be too confusing for people. They wouldn't know how to handle it. It would be discriminatory. Well, that's racist. You're saying black people can't figure out ranked choice voting? So I am sympathetic to some black conservatives who argue there's this condescending attitude that's so woven into their relationship to that community. So many of their arguments are predicated on the idea of Joe Biden summed it up very well when he explained how black parents need help, but they don't know what to do.
Right, they got to put on the record player.
They got to put on the record player, right? It's that. Well, they can't possibly figure out ranked choice voting. Clearly, I mean, you're talking about a city that, from what I know, very much like New Orleans, it's overwhelming majority black city. So when you're saying the people there can't figure out ranked choice voting, who are you talking about?
Yeah, well, this is from the article here. I'll just read paragraph 2 here. The lawsuit, meaning the lawsuit that the Democrats filed contesting this, repeats other claims against the ballot initiative that were dismissed by the D.C. Elections Board when it allowed the measure to proceed, including an argument it would cost money to implement. Ballot initiatives by law cannot have fiscal impact. The Democratic Party further alleges that the measure runs afoul of the D.C. Human Rights Act by discriminating against residents in low-income areas of the city who might be confused by the new system.
What does that mean?
The initiative's backers have said that claim is insulting to black voters, which, of course, it obviously is.
Well, it's racist and it's classist, because you're saying poor people are too dumb to figure out how to do ranked choice voting, right? Again,
what they're really worried about
Joe
is that
Biden
poor
says
people and black people are too smart to keep voting Democrat, and they're afraid that if given other options, they won't. That's what they're actually afraid of.
Exactly, but they're very comfortable. I mean, when I do tours of the Lower East Side, I get into that a little bit, because you still have what we today call a community center. They used to call settlement houses. And you still have a couple of them extant on the Lower East Side from that era, University Settlement and Henry Street Settlement. And those were established really by these upper-class Ivy League WASPs who had a very condescending attitude about the communities they were supposed to be helping. So they would do these annual reports whose thesis was, well, Jews can probably never behave according to European standards of behavior, but at least maybe we could get them to stop stealing. And these were the social workers, right?
Right.
So there's always been this element of patrician condescension in the Democratic Party's attitude, even towards the communities that it claims to be trying to help. And I think you see some of that there in that argument.
Indeed. And just to put a button on this, because I've made this point in the past, but you see here how, because the Democrats have everything to lose in D.C., they are battling ranked choice voting. In a Republican city or town, they would be fighting it. The two major parties are never going to give you ranked choice voting. So when you hear someone like Kyle Kulinski say, well, we can't vote third party until we get ranked choice voting, it's never going to work that way. Why would the duopoly just, out of the kindness of their hearts, give up their grip on power? The way to actually win ranked choice voting is to start voting third party. Because if you start voting third party, then one of the two major parties, be it the D's or the R's, are going to see, oh, we could either lose votes to the third parties, Or if we pass ranked choice voting, there's a chance we may pick up some of those votes on the second round. Because if their theory is right, which is that Greens will vote Democrat on the second round, then Democrats are going to see in the Green Party not a spoiler, but an opportunity for second round votes. So they're more likely to pass ranked choice voting under those circumstances. Just saying, well, we can't vote third party until they give it to us, that's a dead end. Obviously, what is in it for them to give it to us?
Have you ever seen things you will never see? You're never going to see Congress argue to reduce its own salary.
Right, exactly.
And what happened with the Stock Act? What happened? What happened? Remember, there was so much reporting about how they're going to pass new rules and new laws. They dicked it around until people stopped talking about it. There's no fucking way that they're going to give up their insider trading opportunities. They're not going to do it. So anything that's going to, it's who watches the Watchmen. You know, you elect these politicians and then you ask them to do something that undermines their power. They're never going to do it. That's part of how we got here.
Please clap.